Good morning and welcome to the It's All Greek to Me blog tour. I'm Dr. Paul Kiritsis and this is blog number 31. Today is a very interesting blog. Today we're going to be talking about Eve and we're going to be talking about the demythologization of the goddess and how the patriarchal fathers and theologians modified mythological discourse in order to subdue women and keep them in their place. Few people living in the developed countries of the world wouldn't have heard of the creation account of Genesis, central to the mythology of Semitic monotheism. As an exponent of the tribal Aryan and Semitic psyche, the myth itself ascribes the creation of our universe to an entirely chauvinistic and compromised male godhead named Jehovah Elohim. In actual fact, everything that might be seen with the naked eye, the vault of the heavens with its sun, moon, and stars, the earth composed of its mountains, seas, deserts, forests, and plains, as well as the bipedal and quadrupedal creatures roaming upon it, were exoteric expressions of Jehovah Elohim's inwardly turned rumination and coming to be, or so we're led to believe. The Jewish mythographers who composed Genesis sometime between 950 and 750 BCE adorned it with a host of interesting details not unknown to the history of religious ideas. In hovering over the primordial waters, Jehovah Elohim created a supernal garden in the ethereal realm or paradise called Eden, which he proceeded to divide into 4 quarters using 4 rivers as physical markers. At the garden's exact center, he planted something akin to a world tree, which contained all knowledge of good and evil. Many living things took up residence on the branches of this tree, including an aspersive and wily serpent. One of the last things Jehovah Elohim did was to fashion human beings from clay. His first experiment spawned Adam, the first man. Then, realizing the melancholia and loneliness that awaited man if he were to live alone, Jehovah Elohim took one of his ribs whilst he slept and made a secondary and hence inferior creation, Eve, the first woman. In taking the ubiquitous symbols of the world tree, the serpent, paradise, and the world parents, inverting and then transposing them into a cosmogony that was both literal and historical, the patriarchal masterminds behind this peak of Judaic mythography succeeded in instigating a series of events that were entirely retrograde in nature. The worst of the offenders was the implied creed that knowledge was in fact evil, something which no doubt contributed to the devolution of the intellectual world and its mode of critical inquiry, and harnessed psychological control of the masses through the promotion of blind obedience to an order in which the woman and the serpent were blamed for all that was wrong and evil in this world. The first of these images, the world tree, has been connected to matriarchal consciousness since humans first formed tribal communities. If one were to venture outdoors during the nocturnal hours and glance up at the heavenly constellations, he or she might imagine the place circumscribed by the circumpolar stars to be underpinned by a giant tree trunk or pillar with its roots wedged deep within the somnolent darkness of the ground, and its branches stretching out into the heavens, where it birthed fruit in the guise of star gods. Using the law of cosmic sympathy and analogy that defined the world of our ancient ancestors, the gargantuan tree itself unites the sphere of the earth, the land of the living, with that of the underworld, the prima materia, or life source, and the heaven, the place of rebirth. Hence, the tree itself, whether world tree or an ordinary eucalypt, one might find in their backyard, is a material example of the formative forces of development and transformation at work in the cosmos that unite the 3 planes of existence and unconsciously circumscribe the fate of all living things. With roots in the underworld, trunk on the earth, and branches in the heavens, the entire corpus of its body is a transformational vessel through which the corporeal, psychic, and spiritual processes of birth, life, death, and rebirth are all realized, yet it stands without as an unconscious entity unsoiled by the shackles of time or space. In many ways, the world tree is in fact the great mother goddess, or a form thereof, and the image of the serpent entwined within its branches is her animating spirit, the energies which fuel creation from uncreation and order from chaos. There are ample examples of the matriarchal reckoning of the world tree and the serpent from variant mythological traditions across the world. Yggdrasil, the world tree of Norse cosmogony, around which 9 other realms existed, was intimately bound up with silver, the lunar metal and colour of the mother goddess. In Egyptian eschatological thought, 2 of the earliest deities known in Egypt, Nut and Hathor, were frequently depicted on the walls of tombs and mortuary temples in the form of sycamore tree goddesses offering sustenance to the bird-bodied souls, or they were called bars, of the deceased. As we have already seen, the serpent or snake comprised one of the many theriomorphic forms of the great mother goddess in Egypt and had done so since the early dynastic period. So we're talking about between 3100 and 2686 BCE, approximately. In the late Hellenistic myth, composed sometime in 700 BC, there was a sacred apple tree, or in some versions it was a whole grove, that grew in an orchard somewhere near the western horizon. The golden apples that grew in the orchard, called the Garden of the Hesperides, confirmed immortality upon their mortal recipients and had been bred from a branch given to Hera as a wedding present when she wed the king and father of the god Zeus. The garden was tended to by the Hesperides, nymphs of the starry night, and safeguarded by a gruesome 100-headed dragon called Ladon. Both the tree and the serpent reappear again in another Greek tale, in the mythical quest of Jason and the Argonauts. In this, one of the oldest and most widely celebrated myths of the classical world, the treasure guarded by the tree's dragon, itself an extension of the divine feminine, is no longer a golden apple or apples, but the fleece of the gold-haired winged ram, more popularly known as the golden fleece. In the biblical account of Genesis, Jehovah Elohim fashions Eve, the archetypal mother of all living, from Adam's rib. This divine act might be described as something of a bold insurrection against the natural ordering of things in the cosmos, for life itself both arises and is brought forth from the womb of the feminine, or the female. Hence, in relegating Eve, the divine prototype of all women, secondary in the creational order and evolutionarily more distant from the divine origin and unity, the writers of Genesis were unconsciously verifying patriarchal premises that had been laid out by the Aryan and Semite tribes centuries beforehand. These regarded the female inferior to the male and destitute of divine attributes that transcended the carnal self. In their eyes, women were more likely to succumb to temptations devised by the 5 senses and entertain endeavours that were at heart unlawful and morally corrupt. When left to her own psychic devices, Eve would inevitably succumb to her damning impulses and lead both her peers and herself to eternal damnation. Hence all the more reason why Eve should become Adam's personal property and submit to his better grasp of moral righteousness. It is a patriarchal code that any first-time appraisal is bound to overlook, given that its constituent aspects have been cleverly and subtly woven into the moral fabric of the Genesis narrative. Nonetheless, one can be more than certain that the motive's narrative latency is betrayed by gender-associated conventions and sexist attitudes that have unconsciously shaped perception and have unjustly persisted in human consciousness for thousands of years. Perhaps the most frightening thing about the devolutionary process is that it has seeped into the heart of communal values unnoticed and has remained there for God knows how long.